Hi guys and welcome to Horologique. I am Olivier and today I wanted to ask you a question. How many watches do you know that are trying to homage the modern Submariner date? How many do you know that are trying to homage the vintage two-line Submariners? Not many, right? And that's quite a paradox. The Rolex Submariner has to be the most copied and the most homaged watch in the world. However, you have so few of these. Why is that? They look so good and they are so well loved by Submariner collectors. In order to fill that void, little new company Ironwatch has tried to give it a shot and to be a little bit more original, if that word may be allowed when talking about a homage, and they have tried to go for the vintage Rolex two-liners of yesteryear. Have they succeeded in making a nice, good, appealing watch? Are they on the verge of dethroning the current champions that are SAN MARTIN and Chronos? Let's see that right away. Of course, I have left links in the description below so you can go and check this watch should you wish to purchase it. Some of you may be wondering, which Rolex reference is this watch homaging? Well, according to themselves, according to Ironwatch, this watch is homaging the 14060 Rolex, so a Rolex model that was in production from 1990 to about 2002. So the 14060 has the characteristic slim case, so the normal case before Rolex came with the super cases of the current generation. It has a dial with smaller indices than what you may be used to, because at that time Rolex didn't yet have what it called the maxi dial with those big indices filled with lume of the current generations. Instead, it had much smaller indices which held less lume. The 14060 also had a flat sapphire crystal, and as any Rolex from that generation, it had an awful teeny bracelet with an awful pressed clasp. It also had an aluminium bezel insert. However, it may not seem like a lot now, but this watch was so much beloved by Rolex fans because of the purity of the dial. Indeed, that dial is not cluttered by useless text, which is one of the complaints that people get from the Rolex Submariner. It has too much text on the dial. The 14060 has only 2 lines of text at the bottom of the dial instead of 4 of the classic Submariner. It's quite simple. It's because the movement was not a chronometer grade, believe it or not. So Rolex couldn't actually put that the movement was officially certified. So for the most part, this watch is trying to homage the 14060. However, it has allowed itself some liberties. The most visible liberty would be, of course, Bracelet. It has modernized it with all solid elements, which is wonderful, with a pretty decent clasp, all solid and good quality. The other difference with the 14060 would be the ceramic bezel insert, which is also a very welcome addition. The purist may not like it because the 14060 had an aluminium bezel insert, but to everybody else, this looks like a good choice. However, for me, the most appealing thing that they have done here is that they have put a beautiful top hat sapphire crystal, which calls back not to the 14060 but to the models even before, the 1513, which had a beautiful acrylic domed crystal. Very, very nice, and I am glad that they have, well, made some anachronistic choices here, but some that according to me work very well together. Let's talk about dimensions here. The diameter is 40 millimeters, like the 14060. However, the height is 13.2, when the 14060 was around 12.5, 12.6. So a little bit thicker than that. The log to log is 48.5, and here it is bigger, significantly bigger than the 14060, because that one came at 47.5. So it adds a whole millimeter, and you can feel that on wrist. It does look and it does feel bigger than the 14060. Even the 41mm Submariner of today has a smaller log-to-log of 47.9. The end-link to end-link is a massive 52.7, so pretty big. I just wish they had kept it smaller. For comparison's sake, the 14060 had female end links, of course, so that does not count, but the present Submariner, the 12610, has an end link to end link of 51.2, so 1.5 millimeters shorter than this one, and therefore wears better. The log-to-log is a 20mm, and the bracelet tapers from 20 to a beautiful 15.5 millimeters, and it comes up at the clasp at 17.7. So as I was suggesting, the dimensions may be a bit too big for average size wrists. I've got a 17 centimeter wrist, and I believe that it's just a tad big for me. It's not like a massive negative, but you do have to keep that in mind if you have a smaller wrist than mine. The dial is totally reminiscent of the 14060, with the difference here that the dial is matte and the 14060 was already piano black. So here again, they are harking back to the models before the 14060. The indices are smaller than the present maxi dial. Some may find that more elegant, but it also means that it holds less lume. You can see that right away, especially when comparing it to the SAN MARTIN Water Ghost, which homages the maxi dial from Rolex. And you can see that if we accelerate the video, the hands remain pretty legible on the Ironwatch, but the indices kind of fade. Not completely, but they do fade. The hands are very well done on your typical Submariner style. You see very little debris, and you can see that special attention has been taken to finish these hands to a very high standard. On the top of the dial, in a pretty generic lettering, you've got the brand Ironwatch, no logo or anything here. And at the bottom of the dial, very reminiscent of the font of the vintage Submariners, you've got a 660 feet equals 200 meters and an automatic underneath. So this is a very clean, nice looking dial, maybe a little too clean and too generic, some would say. The bezel insert is well made out of ceramic. Those numbers are deeply engraved in there. And the positive point about this bezel is that the lume pip is pretty raised and it is encircled by a metal ring. Let's go to the case of this watch. The finishing is impeccable. Dare I say it is even better than on those vintage 14060s. Especially the brushing. The brushing on those lugs is circular. The polished bevels that descend all through the lugs are every vintage Rolex Submariner's collector's dream. The polishing is made to a very good standard as well. On the flanks of the watch you can see very beautiful polishing. That polishing is carried over to the crown. There is no signed crown here, quite sadly. The caseback is unsigned in typical Rolex fashion. The crown is screwed down. When you unscrew it, you can hand wind the movement, of course. One pull of the crown and you've got the ghost date position. They have not removed it here for the PT 5000. And one more click and you've got hacking. I was pretty disappointed not to see a gasket here. The bezel rotation is very good. Gripping the bezel is a pretty good sensation. You do not feel any sharp surfaces. This is quite clicky. It is not extremely refined like a Submariner or maybe even a SAN MARTIN. It is a bit more metallic. Here it is all down to preference. Do you like that? Do you like the easier to rotate sensation of SAN MARTINs, or for a matter of fact Seiko? Or do you prefer something a bit clickier and sharper? That is up to you. Let's move to the bracelet. The taper makes it very beautiful. The finishing is absolutely gorgeous, on par with what you have on the case. Of course it's a Neusser style, brushed on top, polished on the sides. You've got screw pins and all links and end links are solid, of course. The clasp has the Rolex clasp styles with a fold-over security and the sensation is very good when you open that, and the main latch, which also feels very good when you open it. All the elements are of course solid here. The PT5000 movement in here is kind of a mixed bag. Some people love it, some others hate it. I have had good and bad experiences with this movement, especially with the date changes. But as you have no date here, well, that should settle it. So how is this PT5000 behaving here? As you can see, quite good readings. So far so good for this particular one. 28,800 beats per hour. We are not within cost, but almost there. In any case, you also have a Sellita SW200 option, but that comes of course more expensive. As we are on the subject of price, let's talk about it. This watch will cost $317 on the PT5000 version and $427 on the SW200. That is quite a chunk of money, especially for a newcomer. However, this watch does have some arguments for itself to justify that price. First of all, of course, the movement. The PT5000 is not a cheap movement. It is at least more expensive than your typical Seiko NH35. Then that construction, that build quality, and that finishing. Let me tell you that the finishing is on par with the best I have seen from Chronos and SAN MARTIN. It is really that good. Then there's the comfort. Even though the watch is pretty big, and that will appear on the negatives, you do not see many sharp edges and pointy ends. It is actually pretty comfortable on the wrist. The other positive, that beautifully domed sapphire crystal. That is no cheap thing to make. We see it more and more from higher end homage companies, but still you have to remember that it's no cheap feat. And then of course there's the originality factor. So the fact that they're not going again for a copy of a modern date Submariner, they have dared a bit. So if you like the looks of that, if you're looking for a comfortable watch, this is the watch for you. However, before you click on the buy button, hear me out on the negatives. First of all, and maybe the biggest negative, is that this watch is pretty generic. Ironwatch, the name of the brand, does not suit many. The generic lettering, the no branding of the dial, no branding of the crown, no branding of the clasp. Unless you really like that, that may be a bit generic, and especially a bit generic for $300 and almost $20. Also, there's the fact that this one is a bit bigger than your usual Submariner, so you should make sure that you've got the wrist for that. A 16.5 centimeter wrist should be the bare minimum for this one. But then again, if you like the looks, if you like the originals, don't want to pay the outrageous amounts they're going for, and you have no problems with homages, then this might be a good option for you. That's it for me. I will leave you with other videos from sub homages that I have reviewed in the past. Thank you very much for having watched the video, and I'll be seeing you very soon. Goodbye.